All right, 12:05, let's begin. Welcome and good afternoon, friends. Thank you all for joining us today, especially under the recent circumstances. The impacts of wildfires across our beautiful state are nothing short of devastating, but seeing our communities band together and show resiliency gives us so much hope. We will rebuild. Today's presentation was originally created with COVID-19 in mind, but the crux of it really is communicating during crises. A few housekeeping notes. We understand that not everyone was able to attend today, so we are recording this session right now. Links to this recording and this presentation deck will be shared via email to those who registered for today's session and Travel Oregon's industry newsletter. It will also be posted onto the industry website. The deck includes an appendix section with helpful resources that are not referenced in today's presentation. In addition, we will be sending out a survey and very much appreciate your feedback. Our audience is muted and the chat is disabled, which means I can't tell if you're laughing at any of my jokes to come, so I'll just assume you are. Please feel free to ask questions via Zoom's Q&A feature throughout this presentation. We'll try to answer all of your questions in the last 15 minutes of this hour. So, without further ado, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Sachi, and I'm Travel Oregon's Global Integrated Marketing, Content, and Digital Community Manager. I oversee consumer-facing content on the website, social media, e-newsletters, and print and digital guides. I'm a University of Oregon alumna, but don't ask me about sports, and my favorite season is fall in Oregon.
Awesome. So my name is Erica, and I am a social media strategist at SparkLoft Media. I've been at SparkLoft for about 4.5 years now and have been on Travel Oregon's account since about 2017. So I'm really like Sachi and Mo's kind of right-hand person along with the rest of the SparkLoft team to kind of help create all the beautiful things that you see on our social media channels. My history really stems from destination marketing, hospitality, and airline clients. And, definitely echoing what Sachi said, like we have not had an easy year here in Oregon or in the world in general. So I'm really hoping that there are some helpful takeaways for you in today's presentation. Cool. So just want to give you guys a little bit of context about who SparkLoft is and kind of what we do. So SparkLoft is a social first creative agency, and we really focus on driving growth through engagement. As an agency, we have tons of experience in destination marketing. We've been partnered with Travel Oregon since 2006, feels like a lifetime. And since then, we've worked with dozens of city, state, national destinations, airlines, travel brands, kind of you name it, we've been there. We are an agency that was born in social, and because of that, we've really kept the consumer in mind. So I think as we talk about who the consumer is and who they are right now, you'll really see that tons of our research is rooted in those insights that really help inform what we're doing today and what we're doing tomorrow. We really look at taking motivations and the broader circumstances of crisis, AKA COVID, and everything else in between, in order to help our clients really develop that long-lasting relationship with their audiences. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, just a little bit of a preface of what you can expect to see today. So as Sachi mentioned, this was intended to be more of a COVID-focused webinar, but as we all know, there's a lot of other big things that are happening around us. So in today's presentation, we really want to focus on looking at who our current consumers are as a response of the pandemic and how that travel behavior is shifting. We also want to give you guys some actionable takeaways so that you are leaving this webinar informed and ready to kind of tackle your own channels in response to COVID-19. And with that, you'll also have kind of a plan in mind for maybe what the next month or next quarter could look like for you, and what kind of things you can start tackling as the months go by. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, as we've alluded so far, plain and simple, the world is definitely different now. I think looking at the top of our news feeds, the media we're seeing, the media we're hearing, we've all heard the word unprecedented. I promised myself I wouldn't say it, but here I am. And unfortunately for us, I don't think the world is going back to what it was anytime soon. And next slide. So this is just kind of a quick visual snapshot of what we've been experiencing in Oregon and kind of what our world currently looks like. With a global pandemic, there's racial and social justice movements happening and ongoing political unrest as we kind of approach the primaries come November. And then as Sachi mentioned, the recent wildfires was definitely a roadblock that none of us were really anticipating to kind of layer on to this year. We've really had our work cut out for us as brands, business owners, marketers, you name it. It's definitely been a challenging year, but we are going to get through it together. Cool. So kind of diving into the new consumers and kind of looking at how COVID has impacted the world that we're in right now, we really want to figure out who we're talking to and what they're looking for. And this is definitely a key component of nailing down any social media strategy, is figuring out who you're talking to. For the next slide. So right now, consumers have fundamentally changed. You know, we are approaching month 7 of the pandemic, and consumers, including myself, feel anxious, frustrated, possibly facing economic uncertainty with job loss or pay cuts, or kind of all of the things that we all hoped would not happen as a result of this shift. And with that, the consumers have learned new behaviors. So more people are ordering takeout, ordering food online, pretty much buying everything online, streaming live events that typically would have been in person. So live music, art, sports, you name it. And then also working out from home has taken over. I know we've all been invited to a live stream here or then over the last 7 months. I know I have. And then I think just kind of looking at these learned behaviors and thinking about what they mean for the travel industry. So maybe this means like Zoom calls instead of a business trip that would typically be more one-on-one or in person. Conventions and meetings going more virtual, family vacations maybe being more unlearned because, you know, we're not spending that quality time in a new tropical destination or in the beautiful woods of Oregon. We're spending them indoors. So those travel behaviors might be changing, and then non-traditional forms of tourism might be developing just as a result of the pandemic. Go to the next slide. So right now, I think it's really important to understand that travel is more emotional than ever. You know, as people start to dip their toes back into the travel cycle and domestic travel starts to rebound, it's really important to understand that emotions are really dictating how consumers are traveling. Right now, we're seeing that booking cycles are extremely short. People booking trips as little as in 4 to 7 days in advance. And some of those factors that are really kind of taking hold of the travel cycle right now are health and safety considerations. You know, is where you're going safe? Do you have the finances to fund a trip? And then also, you know, as we mentioned with like the protests and other political uprisings that are kind of happening right now, really looking at what the political climates are, which might deter some people from visiting destinations that maybe were once on their list. In addition to that, travel is becoming more private. So there is definitely a rise and more of a travel shaming. So people aren't really sharing their experiences like they have in the past. But all in all, I think it is important to know that people are craving travel more than ever. And people are ready to travel. It's just, there's a lot of factors that kind of come into play when, you know, hitting that book button. You can go to the next slide. Cool, so just to kind of echo off of that, I think this is just kind of a nice screen grab of kind of where travel is looking in terms of financial outlook among US consumers, as well as our consumers' values and priorities, and just some kind of example headlines, which I think can kind of set a nice tone for, you know, where that dialogue is heading. But as travel remains really emotionally charged, it's really important to understand that travel is not only for the healthy, for the financially secure, really making sure that we understand that it's not that accessible amenity that maybe it was in the past. And it's really kind of built upon that confidence that you can travel and maintain your health, but also have the funds to secure it if you face some economic uncertainty during this time. You can go to the next slide. Cool, so just kind of wrapping that all up, and as we mentioned, just kind of looking at who our most eligible travelers are, we kind of have them broken out into 3 different sections. So our first one on the left here would be our opportunistic traveler. So these are people that are really looking for flexibility. They're definitely doing their research, they're planning, they have contingency plans in place. They might be looking for more of that like flexibility of booking and cancellation fee to be waived if they were to change their mind last minute. But they're definitely going to destinations that likely have similar case counts of COVID, or are looking at for safety protocols that are maybe similar to where they're comfortable with. So really within their comfort levels is where they're exploring. In the middle here, we have the burned out traveler. So I think a lot of us can maybe identify with feeling burned out at this time, but these people are really people who are just done with quarantine. They are really looking at needing a change of scenery, outweighing that risk that comes with traveling. And with that, they're looking for convenience. They want to be able to book places that are open, available, have room for them. Maybe they want to stay an extra day. They really want to be able to make the most of the destination that they're visiting, and don't really care about the risks associated. The last one on the right here would be our determined traveler. So they really are adamant to get out there and start traveling again. They don't really feel like people need to be dictating where they're going or when they're going, and they're really seeking that freedom. So they're looking for places with the fewest restrictions, and really looking for that flexibility to really kind of experience what I would imagine a post-COVID or pre-COVID world feels like.
I feel like I've seen each of these personas in Oregon this year. The determined traveler was at the North Coast in traffic at the onset of quarantine. The opportunistic traveler had to learn to embrace patience and flexibility this year. And the burned out traveler is still trying to make a reservation at the door.
Perfect. So kind of after wrapping up kind of like who we're talking to and kind of how the consumer has changed as a result of COVID-19, we really want to think about how we're being strategic in order to navigate these times of adversity that we're all currently facing. Go to the next slide. Cool. So just kind of looking at what our strategic approach looks like to success on social media, we've kind of divided it into this pretty simple and digestible quadrant. So you can take a look at what the 4 key components are of success on social. And this really is relevant more so outside of crisis, but is really, you can optimize these things to adapt to whatever the needs are of your brand or in response to whatever crisis we're currently addressing in the moment. So in the top left, really looking at your audience and really taking time to like identify who your target audience is for your business, for your brand, really understanding that unique role that you play in the consumer's life, I think is really the key there. And with that, you want to jump over to your content, which is really how you're going to plan to message and interact with those people on social media. This is going to help you maintain relevance and really make sure that you're giving your message to the right people at the right time. And in the bottom left here, you'll see community. So really focusing on interacting with the audience that you've outlined and how they're responding to your content, and making sure that you're giving them the attention that they deserve, and really rewarding them for positive interactions on your social channels. And this can have immediate and long-term benefits. I think especially during crisis, people are going to remember the brands that are there during these times. They're going to remember the people who are showing up and have a stance and are catering to their needs as individuals. And it really helps position your brand as authentic and trustworthy, not only during times of crisis and definitely well beyond that. And then in the bottom right, just kind of looking at all of that, you have your audience, your content, you're fostering your community, and now you have your goals. So, I would really recommend that we identify social media goals that align with your overarching business objectives and really look at what's performing well. How do you continue to move things like that into the future so that you can continue to optimize based on your monthly or quarterly learnings, however you would like to approach that. Cool, you can go to the next slide. Here's just kind of a look at the social trends. I think, we've all spent a substantial amount of time indoors, and as a society that's influenced our behavior, which in turn influences what's trending. So just going to run through these kind of quickly, but I think starting on the left, looking at mobile entertainment, I think this just kind of goes without saying, like we've all done it. We've all gone to IGTV, watched a long form video, or we've spent hours on TikTok, guilty as charged. But I think it's really important as content creators and marketers that we are optimizing the content that we're distributing on social for vertical, because we're just seeing that that's becoming more and more popular with Reels, TikTok, Instagram stories, and IGTV. Vertical video is not going anywhere, and vertical content isn't going anywhere. So really focusing on making that a priority as we kind of approach the end of 2020 and into 2021. That second one there, so digital community, I think, same notes as before, like we're missing out on virtual events, live music, kind of all of these things that we were really used to as a society on building that in-person community is now moving to more digital. Now more than ever, people are on social media, and we've all joined live streams. We're all looking for a way to feel connected during this time apart. And I think as a brand, if you can create things that keep people coming back, day after day, week after week, that can really keep you top of mind in the future and really kind of help create that sense of community for your followers. And then in the middle here, just kind of looking at seamless experiences. So, people right now don't really have a lot of energy to be kind of like bounced around from social to website, or like, really trying to create that really integrated experience, especially if you have a product that you're selling, really making sure that you're taking advantage of like the native features of the apps. So we've all seen like Instagram ads where you can shop, Pinterest ads where you can shop. And as Gen Z kind of rises into that really strong buying power, they're not going to have time for like a really clunky digital experience. So we need to make getting your service or product to the consumer as easy as possible. And then kind of the fourth one here, no surprise to anyone, but as mentioned with digital community, really focusing on virtual. So I think, this can be kind of daunting for people, but I think it is the reality of the direction that we're going. Conferences, live music, kind of all of these larger scale events are either going to be fully virtual or will likely be some sort of hybrid, amenity that people will be able to join, whether it's for the tourism and hospitality industry, or just like creating like new ways for people to network and to meet each other and like really interact is going to be kind of the direction that virtual is going to be going. And then with augmented reality, this is definitely a more like complex tactic, but I think kind of layers on nicely with the virtual events, that as these things that we're so familiar with in person kind of dissipate, that we really are giving people a chance to have, notable and nostalgic experiences of your product or destination or offering that you have. And kind of bringing those into like an augmented reality sort of way, so that people can experience them even if they're not really there in person yet, until we have a vaccine or a safer way to kind of reintroduce people to our offerings like in person. And I think at this point, I will hand it over to Sachi to talk about messaging.
Thanks, Erica. Okay. So all of our visions of 2020 were totally off. I should be a tourist in Japan right now, but just like the opportunistic traveler, we've learned to be flexible and adaptive this year. Your social media messaging is no different. While I can't tell you exactly what crisis to prepare for next week, we have seen a few themes to help your brand be nimble. Number one, be tactful and sensitive, or in other words, read the room. Understand the current climate, such as public health, natural disasters, new restrictions, or anything else that is dominating the news, and put yourself in the shoes of others. Would your post come off as tone deaf? On Monday, I wanted to post a happy-go-lucky image of blue skies and a girl posing next to dahlias, but Erica had to remind me that not everyone is ready, as much as the state is still being impacted by wildfires. It helps to have an Erica for a second set of eyes, as well as a content calendar that can be shuffled if it feels inappropriate to post. Number two, engagement rules all. People are going to remember brands that stayed relevant and provide some relief during difficult times. Share content that fans would expect from your page. For us, it's beautiful scenic images of Oregon. Ask your audience questions and be sure to respond to build trust as an expert. You can do this with a simple image and text post, or you can take advantage of platform features like Instagram story polls and Facebook Live. For example, when quarantine first hit, Travel Oregon engaged with Instagram fans by asking what their favorite Oregon-made movies were, and then reposted their answers with gifts. Simple, but successful. Number three, provide reassurance. Consumers want to know what to expect before they visit. It plays a large role in their decision-making process. How are you providing a safe environment, and what does the customer need to do to prepare? Be sure to pin your most important posts to the top of the page so those details don't get buried, and talk about your consumer safety often. After all, it's 2020. To keep consumers engaged, you're going to need new assets for these changing times. Update your photo and video assets to capture life in this new normal. It's painful to put aside your great content from pre-COVID. Trust us, we know, but it's necessary. All right, let me guess. You guys went to the images before the text? That's why visual assets are so important. Staying relevant is key. Think about the recent shifts in consumer behaviors and how you can represent that in photos and videos. Demonstrate how your brand has adapted to Oregon safety guidelines, such as showing staff wearing face coverings or signs promoting social distancing. Diversity is also important, as people want to see themselves in your content and you want your brand to be known as welcoming to all. Manage expectations by showing real experiences people will have with your destination or business. This helps potential customers plan their trip and trust your brand. With COVID-19, business models have changed and your assets should reflect that. We've seen questions about posting cadence. Should you post to social media every day? Really, it depends on your brand engagement and your channel history. Do fans engage with your content daily? Are you stretching to find content? Our recommendation is to choose quality over quantity. One image that resonates is better than 10 that kind of work. And when we say quality, we don't mean the snazziest professional photography. We mean quality in content, assets that are relevant, that manage expectations, and make an impact with your audience. So many of these new consumer behaviors are here to stay, at least for a while. With public safety on the line, people have adopted habits and preferences that have shaped our culture. Well beyond 2020, you'll want to show hygienic food practices, safety protocols, and dining with distance. Visitors are going to continue to seek out less crowded experiences, wide open spaces, and places with room to roam. These themes can guide your content, but ultimately, your product or destination is the star of the show. In these examples, face coverings are not the focal points, they just help set the scene. Be sure that servers are wearing gloves and face coverings when handling food. Sneak some hand sanitizer in the background. Refresh assets for new services and ditch images of unavailable offerings. By the way, if these shots look familiar, it's because I took them from your Instagram account. On social media, the best practice is to always get repost permission and give photo credit, which I'm sorry for not doing here. You know who you are. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think just to like echo Sachi there with just how, updated assets can really help set the stage for what you're offering. I think it's just really important, especially as we kind of look back at the consumers and how they're making those travel decisions. Like, while everyone will kind of have their own means of assessing, what's the right experience for them, what's the right restaurant, what's the right hotel, the visuals are really the star of the show. Like, people are going to make decisions based on their comfort levels. And if you're showing, kind of hand sanitizer, or, that your guests are wearing masks and that your staff are wearing masks, these don't have to be like super high quality, like polished, like Sachi said, professional photos, but I think they just really help give our consumers a chance to identify if an experience is right for them and is going to be appropriate and aligned with their values and comfort levels. So just wanted to add a little bit more context there. So kind of looking at messaging and assets and kind of how those all come together, I think COVID-19 and all the crises that we're currently enduring, it really comes down to, having that ethical responsibility to share health and safety messaging, but also not forgetting that social media is a great source of positivity and can really bring a lot of light to these dark times. You can go to the next slide. So as I said, increasing storytelling is really important, can really help shed the light. And, we do have that ethical responsibility to show how we're treating these times as a brand, as a business, and how we're kind of adapting to the protocols that are being rolled out by the governor. But we're also responsible for sharing the good things, and increasing that storytelling can really help drive deeper levels of engagement. As I mentioned in a past slide, people are really going to remember the stories and the things that make them feel good during these really kind of like more than sad times. But, there's a lot of good that's also happening. And I think even just with the latest wildfires, you can see with the first example of the superheroes emerging at the holiday farm, like that was one of like the most adorable stories I think I have seen come out of that, beyond just kind of showcasing how the communities of Oregon are very resilient and how we've all come together during these turbulent times. So really focusing on spreading that positivity, celebrating your fans and kind of the good that's happening out there, and then sharing those meaningful stories. We have a couple examples outside of the holiday farm as well. So I really love Alaska Airlines and their presence on social media throughout all of COVID. I just think they've really adapted well as a pretty large and well-recognized brand to the times. And just this example particularly, just kind of showcasing a traveler and sharing her experience on flying. I think like flying is definitely something some people are feeling more comfortable doing. Others still are very wary. So sharing content like this that really caters to their really active consumer worries, I think can really help alleviate those concerns if they know that they have community care in mind. And then we have the pedal through example, which was just a great story of a first-time bike packer throughout Oregon. Really kind of shares that level of inspiration that I think a lot of people are really craving right now, just as times are a little more bleak and people are really missing getting outside. It's like we're heading towards winter. So like, what are kind of these things that we can capitalize on to keep the momentum high and the travel dreaming alive? And, you know, the need for your offering or brand kind of at top of mind during these times. So just some tips and tactics that kind of align with those examples. So inspirational itineraries that really cater to the new consumer, maybe sharing interesting stories about your brand, local business spotlights. If you are maybe a DMO, how can you kind of support your local community? Because obviously smaller businesses have suffered during this time. Really making your page like a resource for the community. Focusing on those community stories and sharing testimonials are also a great way to kind of ease traveler nerves, but also spread that joy that we're all kind of looking for in our feeds. Cool. So kind of piggybacking off of storytelling and really focusing on community, you know, I think we've talked about our audiences, we've talked about who that consumer is, we've talked about how we adopt the messaging and content so that we're relevant. We've talked about storytelling, how we really make our unique offerings and stories shine on social. But after all that is said and done, we need to focus on fostering that level of community and really keeping people engaged. So we really want our most loyal fans to feel important, and we want them to feel loved in the back end and reward them for engaging with our content. So you can go to the next slide. Cool. So as there are heightened times of uncertainty, as I mentioned, it's incredibly important to dedicate time to connect with your social community. I mean, if you think about just even on a personal level, how many times you've maybe interacted with a brand that you're really passionate about and you've gotten a like really heartfelt or like personalized response, and it just feels nice to feel acknowledged and recognized by a brand that you follow on social media. So that's just really important. And I think like you get to the finish line, and I think the finish line here is the community management part, because you put all this effort into creating the content that fits your audience, and you really need to reward people for engaging, because that's just going to continue to, you know, drive that repeat engagement. And especially during times of uncertainty, people are really craving that digital connection and really wanting to know, you know, that someone's on the other side of the screen. I think the two examples we have here, obviously COVID has impacted, you know, specifically for Travel Oregon and for all of us here in Oregon, you know, where we can go, what we can do, what's open, what trails are open, what trails are closed, and what kind of offerings that we have, as well with the wildfires. Like, there were so many people who were knocking on Travel Oregon's door asking how to help. And I think just having that rallying cry for community involvement really gives, you know, and gave Travel Oregon a chance to be that resource. And it was, you know, from the other side of it, from the brand side, it is really awesome to be able to know that you're helping your community and you're using social media as a super helpful tool during these times where people feel a little bit lost. So just kind of tips and tactics around community management would be to just make sure that you're doing a sweep for comments and questions. I think like I always like to kind of develop a priority list. So focusing on questions first that I have the answers to right away, responding to any direct messages that I feel like I can answer in the moment. Always respond with more information. So if you have website content, or if you have someone asking about like maybe what offers or maybe what your menu is like right now, always drive people to another resource that can give them more information. Specifically for COVID, like anytime you have like a website landing page that maybe has more guidance on what's open in your area or what's open in your region or whatever it may be, I think just giving people that additional level of information to do that independent research is always a good opportunity. And I know Sachi will have thoughts on this as well, but definitely focusing on that priority list and ignoring the trolls. So I think as we've seen with everything that's been going on this year, there's always going to be people who have divisive or polarizing perspectives on the content that you're going to put out. And I do think it is really important to reward the positive interactions and know when it's your chance to engage, or maybe just let that comment slide by without any energy allocated to it. I also think it's important to maybe look at TripAdvisor and other sources outside of, you know, true social channels to really look for opportunities to address any frequently asked questions or kind of frequent comments that you've been seeing on your channels. I think that's a really good way to maybe create some templated responses, drive some efficiencies. I'm sure like a lot of your teams are very lean and really looking for efficiencies wherever possible. So really trying to figure out where the priorities lie, what repeat questions people are asking can really help you strategize how to make the most of your time spent community managing. You can go to the next slide. Cool. And so just kind of looking at beyond community management and how that can be, a really strong engagement tactic, there's just definitely other ways that you can engage people on social. So some other ways to stay engaged would be to reshare past content pieces. I think this is a really low lift opportunity to share what has performed well for you in the past. So if you have a really compelling video about your product or service or business that you want to share, and it still feels relevant even during times of COVID, I would say that go ahead and reshare it. Maybe you could crop it a different way, give it some new legs to, expand that past performing content across your social channels. Also, there's so many native features that you can use to drive engagement from your community. So looking at poll options, questions, Q&As, just kind of ways that you can incorporate some more fun and engaging tactics into your day-to-day content can really help tell more about who you are as a brand, as well as invite people in to, participate. Also nostalgia, I think this comes with playing on the emotional appeals that we've talked about a lot and how travel is really emotional right now. I think personally, I really do feel nostalgic for all the experiences that I've ever had in Oregon that we're entering, 7 months of quarantine. But really making sure that you're showing places that can evoke that sense of positivity, joy, and kind of being that light in someone's feed, I think is really important. So looking at the nostalgic experiences that you can share. And then of course, like you could do live streams. That's very accessible. I think with that, there just kind of comes another layer of preparations, making sure you have good sound and good equipment, that can make that a successful endeavor for you. I mean, I feel like our iPhones at this point and all of our smartphones really have a lot of strong capabilities there. And then I think just the easiest thing you could do is just expand your presence on Instagram stories. I think with the rise of the vertical content that we talked about, just kind of seeing how you can convert the content that you're using on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, maybe seeing how you could turn that into an Instagram story. I know there's a lot of great apps out there like Canva and Unfold that can really make your content a bit more polished if you don't have a full design resource at your fingertips. You can go to the next slide. Cool. So that was a lot of information, but I just want to kind of run through kind of what comes next. I think, it's really important when you attend a webinar to feel like you've walked away with something tangible and that you can really have actionable items that you can take into the next day, next month, next quarter. So I just kind of want to walk through like a quick recap and then just some kind of next steps. So you can go to the next slide. Cool. So I think just kind of covering everything that we did, looking at the implications for travel and tourism as they stand right now, just some high level takeaways on, when you go into content planning, how you can adjust what you're doing to maybe make everything a little bit more relevant. So I think just knowing that the non-traditional tourism is increasing and we'll see more staycations, more microcations, and just knowing that maybe even more extended stays might be something that are available to people. But definitely looking at ways that you can modify your product and maybe being more flexible. So whether that's waiving change fees on your product or service, waiving cancellation fees, may help give people more confidence in booking, and that will help entice people to kind of click that book button sooner rather than later. And then the second one, just looking at redefined working conditions, which I think kind of layers into the staycation, kind of micro vacation message, is with more remote flexibility, we might see more people doing extended stays and more like work from wherever, just because this was, kind of the one time that we're all kind of have the more flexible lifestyle. So I think just kind of showing how you can cater to that non-traditional tourist in the lodging and itinerary options, I think is super important. The third bullet, just looking at personal investment. So I think this just talks about more of that storytelling and kind of what you can do there, really getting people to be emotionally invested in your brand can really make them more receptive to more direct calls to action. And then I think the last one, just kind of looking at how this year, at least me talking to a lot of my friends in my personal circle, feel like 2020 is a bit of a wash, and that we haven't been able to have the experiences that we really hoped that we would have this year. So next year, it's pretty, certain that people will be looking to like splurge a bit more and maybe have a bigger grand getaway. The next slide. Cool. So what can you do now? I think this is where more of the actionable items take stage, but really looking at how you can audit your social channels. So on the next slide, you'll see kind of like a breakdown of what you can do this week, this month, or this quarter, and just making sure that you're going through the slides that we've previously shared to make sure that your assets are aligned, that your messaging is aligned, and that you're really looking at talking to the right people for your brand or business. And then you can continue to lean on that nostalgia, which I think just caters to that overarching storytelling and really fostering that sense of joy, continuing to make those emotional appeals and keep the travel dream alive. Because right now, traveling freely feels so far away that we really want to make people remember, why they love your brand, your product, your service, whatever it is you're offering. I think that's a really strong and powerful tool during this time. And then definitely for more of those travel and tourism brands, looking at catering to those unique travel scenarios. So maybe it's, developing new itineraries for the ultimate staycation, or it's coming up with a way to cater to those more extended stay visitors. So maybe it's like giving people a resource for local grocery stores, knowing that more people are cooking at home. I think we just have to make sure that we're supporting the new travel habits that have emerged as a result of COVID. And then lastly, we just want to be like hyper aware of the personal circumstances. So as mentioned, everyone's facing their own personal challenges kind of outside all the other things that are happening in the world. So really taking a look at who is telling your story as a brand or a destination, and really making sure that everything you're putting out there really resonates with them and that it doesn't feel out of touch. And you can go to the next slide. So yeah, I'm not going to read all of this, but I think this is a very helpful, like actionable next step guide to kind of looking at the 4 key pillars that we talked about. So adapting your messaging, updating your assets, sharing stories, and then community care, and really fostering, that deeper level of community management. So just kind of looking at this week, this month, and this quarter, here's just like some, awesome ways that you can start auditing your content and making sure that you're making steps forward during this time. Because, with the election coming up and kind of, active wildfires still in Oregon and everything that's happening with COVID, and, it's just really important to continue to plan and continue to stay adaptable and continue to optimize your content so that it's as relevant as possible. Go to the next slide. And that was kind of my whole spiel. But I did just want to put this link at the end, which will be sent out at the end of the webinar, just on how you can stay in touch with SparkLoft. I think, it's been really fascinating to be on the front lines of social media for the last 7 months and during, these times of uncertainty. But we are always working on content to help, our clients and beyond, kind of focused on research and trends, technology, and like any audience insights. So I highly would recommend that if you're looking to like maybe hear more about what's happening in the world of social, that you subscribe to SparkLoft's newsletter, because it's definitely full of some really good stuff. Yeah, and that's about it for me. So I think now we will go into some questions. Get to maybe be put on the spot.
Definitely. Okay. I'm going to go from the top down. So as a small business owner, my capacity to post messages is really limited. I have focused on Facebook, but you're talking a lot about Instagram. Is there one platform that I should focus on right now?
So I would say there's a few different answers that are coming to mind, like right out the gate. But I feel like Facebook and Instagram are both really powerful tools. I think from like a rising in trends perspective, I do think Instagram is definitely where more of our younger audience is, whereas like Facebook definitely schools like a bit of an older demographic. So I think it really just depends on, going back to your audience and really focusing on who you're aiming to talk to. I think, it's important to know that if you are able to implement any sort of paid media strategy into that, you can always adjust your demographics when targeting people. But I think spending time on Facebook is equally important to Instagram. I think it is also just important to consider kind of the climate on Facebook right now, specifically, especially with the election coming up. It will become a very chatty platform around politics, as most of our social channels have. But I think, spending time there is still worth it for sure.
Yeah, I would say that Facebook is our #1 priority, followed by Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TripAdvisor. There was a question ahead of this webinar and registration that was, is LinkedIn an appropriate platform to promote a gap confidence message?
Yeah, so I think I actually wasn't sure what that quote meant, but I think LinkedIn is definitely more of that professional space. I think, people are going there for different messages, and they're definitely, I think, more open to reading maybe more long form content about like the destination on maybe a more like logistical level or whatever your product or offering is. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's just a different space than Facebook and Instagram. But I definitely would recommend like continuing to showcase like new developments, maybe like more thought leadership on that platform. I think like overall in response to COVID, like anything health and safety still has a home there, because it is just a top of mind conversation that will be, distributed across all platforms in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely more of the industry focused content. So if you're a meetings organizer, it definitely makes sense. But there are less people on there than Facebook. Facebook, you can really target more people that are outside your circles. But I did love, like, I think Eugene Cascades Coast, Visit Seaside, the Oregon Coast does a great job of uplifting some of their more industry focused content onto LinkedIn. Okay, let's see.
Perfect.
Here's another question from Carolina. How do you keep social media messaging relevant during and right after disasters such as Alameda fire that hit our region and the neighboring towns of Talent and Phoenix?
Yeah, I mean, so I think just kind of thinking about how, Sachi and I worked together on Travel Oregon while everything was kind of evolving, is really just kind of sharing resources in the moment. So I think that is one of those times where, in the moment, you really need to maybe look at, like, I think Governor Kate Brown was a great resource for sharing like the latest and kind of looking at what's most relevant for your community particularly, and kind of sharing things as they start to develop. But I think at the end of the day, whatever information you're distributing, whether it's during crisis, after crisis, or in preparation for something that maybe you have more insight that's coming, always making sure that you're using a really reputable resource to kind of drive that information. But I do think crisis communication is very, very special in the sense that it does happen more in like real time. It is more like less planning, more real time engagement, but definitely a lot of like information sourcing and distributing, depending on the current needs, or looking at what people are asking is also a great tool to figure out what information people are looking for.
Yeah, just to echo that, Travel Oregon wasn't planning on posting a lot during the wildfires. We didn't know if it was really our place, but we started hearing more about partner messaging from, emergency management, the forests, state parks, and ODFW. And then we realized, we have this power. We can connect with our audience here and give them responsible visitor behavior information and also ways to help communities. So I do think there is a place for that. You just kind of have to really assess it and take it day by day. All right, next question. Hi, Dave. We don't do Insta stories right at this time, mostly because I don't know how to yet, but also thought the longevity of feed posts were more important. Are stories really a good way to interact with our followers, and why? And he's a small business owner, by the way.
Yeah, so I think Instagram stories, I think we've just seen those rise like over the last, year and a half. They just continue to be a very trending space to share content. I think, there's a lot of capabilities that are available in Instagram stories that aren't available, in other aspects of Instagram, such as like link sharing and the interactive features like polls, quizzes, questions. I think Instagram stories are just kind of designed to interact with your fans and your followers, which I think is why that makes it such a unique tactic to use, because it really is unique across the platforms, and what you can do and how you can interact with people. I think if you don't know how to get started, there's definitely a lot of resources. I'm happy to share some links on how to get started there. As I mentioned earlier, there are like apps you can use where you just simply type in your copy and you can drop in images to really create a custom Instagram story that looks polished but doesn't take a lot of effort or strong design skills. But I think just the way that Instagram stories is developed within Instagram, it just kind of naturally alludes itself to be a really engaging space where a brand and consumers can interact.
Yeah, it's one more way to get on the top of people's algorithm. You might, feeds are a little bit more clogged. Not as many people or brands use Instagram stories quite much as we do, and keeps us top of mind. Like Erica was saying, within Instagram stories, there are some pretty simple ways that you can just create them without having to do much graphic design. I'm a fan of copy and pasting some GIFs in there. We've also been using Instagram stories to share partner messages that align with our brand, particularly during wildfires, which has been really great. Okay. Any specific examples on staycation itineraries? That's a fun one.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about it since I could see it in our Q&A. So I can't think of any right out the gate, but like as examples, but I think just thinking about what sort of information people would want. So, in Oregon, if someone from Portland was like heading out to like maybe the southern coast or like Florence, and maybe they hadn't been there before, what sort of information would you want? Or even if you're just heading to, say you live on like the outskirts of Portland and you're just heading into the city for the night, like what sort of information do you want? I don't think the information is too drastically different than what you would need as, a new visitor from out of state, but you definitely have a lot of context that maybe doesn't need to be shared. But I still think, sharing top things to do, places to eat. And I think it's important too to create any itinerary content through that COVID lens. Especially if you're creating new itinerary content, just to make sure that maybe it is linking out health and safety protocols of whatever you're listing out as your recommended itinerary. Like maybe it's a night in downtown Portland or in Southeast Portland. So just kind of, I think, figuring out what's the most relevant types of information and making sure that you're sharing resources, whether that's like directions or maybe like more local friendly tips like where to park. I think there's just like little things that you can implement to make those feel like more homey kind of itineraries versus one that you would distribute to someone coming in from out of state.
Yeah, I love that. And you can also really embed some of that quarantine content that was getting turned out. So we were posting about like books and movies that were written and filmed in Oregon. And so you can kind of connect that to your sense of place. When I stayed at the Cannery Pier Hotel for my honeymoon, they have DVDs of all the movies that were filmed in Astoria. So that's a really cool connection to Oregon that you can connect with a staycation itinerary. All right, I'm going to skip one just because this one relates to a question we had just addressed. Would love these. So to help those that are learning about how to tell Instagram stories, like Dave indicated, I would love those app names as well. Erica, I think you said you were going to send some links out.
Yep. Okay. So there's Canva, it's Canva, and then Unfold, Unfold, just testing my spelling really quick. But yeah, no, I can definitely compile a list of those. They're pretty intuitive to use and not too complicated. So I can definitely pass those along.
Great. And then we have a question from Margaret, who I believe is from Bandon. Is there a place you recommend learning how to tie Facebook and Instagram together? We are a DMO, and being tied to our personal emails is always a challenge to be able to work on them. I'll start with that, actually, Erica.
Sure.
So for Travel Oregon, our content team, the Global Integrated Marketing team, we work with SparkLoft for social media and Media America for publishing, and we collaborate every quarter, if not more often, to talk about what stories that we should be focusing on. So really, a lot of our content for social starts with the research level, where we're trying to figure out what's the most relevant things to talk about. So we might have a story that goes in our e-newsletters, and then SparkLoft runs with it and kind of takes it to the social level. And a lot of times we're using the same baseline content for all our channels. We're just kind of adapting it to the style of each platform. Do you have anything to add?
I do, because I just remembered that I forgot to share that we did attach the best practices at the end of the presentation. So I didn't run through them just because they are a bit more granular about how to kind of crop and adapt your messaging for each platform. So I think there's going to be a lot of helpful insights in there on how you can kind of create some of that like overarching content and how you can kind of tailor it for each of the platforms will be there. So definitely a good question.
Okay, here's another one from Michelle. One of the most difficult things about social media is getting in front of the right audience and gaining applicable followers, especially in the time of COVID. Besides targeted ads, are there other ways or tips to get in front of the right audience, specifically on Instagram and Twitter?
I'm just rereading the question a little bit. It's a long one. Yeah, so I feel like obviously targeted ads are, I think, the most, for lack of a better word, targeted way to get in front of the right people, as long as you have a really firm understanding of who you're trying to talk to. But I think in terms of Instagram and Twitter, I think it's good to know that those are kind of two of the platforms where, you know, hashtags are still like a pretty relevant way to source like content discovery and things like that. So I think there's kind of two parts I would recommend. Like you could find conversations like Twitter chats or places where you can kind of insert yourselves into conversations to kind of put you and get you exposure in front of the right people. Same on Instagram. Like if you are, you can look at location tags and maybe engage with people who've been in the area where you are or been at your business or this or that. Like there's a lot of ways that you can kind of hack the Instagram capabilities, whether it's through location tags, hashtags, even like competitor followers, where you can kind of look through and look at ways at proactively engaging with people to really get yourself in front of the right people once you kind of have that firm understanding of who it is you're trying to reach and connect with.
I love that competitors example. Watch out, California.
Gotta be sneaky.
Yeah, and you know, I would say too, like feel free to engage in our comment threads too. I see quite a few different DMOs and businesses doing that, and it's pretty effective. I immediately go to their page and start looking at their content. Okay, let's see. Any suggestions on messaging for a county that remains in phase 1 while surrounding counties are in phase 2? I feel you there. We don't feel comfortable openly inviting people to our area, although they're coming anyway. Examples of soft reminders that travel isn't recommended.
Yeah, I have some thoughts. I'm sure, Sachi, you have some thoughts also. But I think it's just kind of being mindful of calls to action. I think that's where you can kind of dance around that immediate, like, visit now sort of message to not come off like tone deaf to your particular county's restrictions. I think it's still okay to focus on inspiration and continue to inform people about what there is to do and to continue to highlight your offerings in a really positive light. But with that, I do think, you know, there is that responsibility to share, you know, your restrictions and keep people aware of kind of what is the recommended policy like within your county and what that means for potential visitors and locals alike. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, you know, we feel that here in Multnomah County. So I think there's ways of positioning the copy itself to being like, hey, locals, or locals guide, or, you know, you can target ads too, specifically to areas. We actually have done some responsible recreation targeted ads that are dark. So only people who are in the geography that we've denoted are going to see those ads. So that's also a fun way where you can still be engaging with locals. But yeah, I think just it's all in the messaging and just kind of treading lightly and being positive with those positive stories. When you respond to people who say like, oh, I'm coming from afar, be like, well, you know, it's a great time to visit? Spring.
Yeah, and I think just kind of echoing that, I think that's where community management becomes really important, just because that's where you can really customize your messaging for people who are doing exactly that. Like, I'm coming from out of town, what should I do? And that's where you can kind of lightly inform people of the current restrictions. Obviously, you cannot control whether or not they come, but you can give them the information they need to make that level of an educated and informed decision about travel.
Okay. Yeah, 100%, Erica. We have one last question. I think it's pretty easy. Do you know of a way to use your computer for Instagram instead of your phone?
Yep. So you should be able to just log in on desktop. You're a little bit limited with what you can do. I'm fairly certain you can upload content, but it just doesn't have the same capabilities as it does on your phone. I would say desktop is primarily used more of a space to consume content rather than create content. But you can definitely you can still log in and access the platform on desktop.
It's just a million times better on mobile. And I think they protect it for purpose.
Yeah. They really want
I think we're
mobile first.
Yeah. Yeah, blame them. So we're going to have to wrap up for today. I hope you guys all got some great, delicious information and a delicious lunch. We are going to include our contact information should you want to get back to us after this. There's also a snazzy survey. I hope we get some good responses. Yeah, so thank you for joining us today. I'm Sachi from Travel Oregon.
And I'm Erica from SparkLoft Media. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. It was a pleasure to be here.
Have a great day.
Bye.